Dr. Shaul Cohen is an associate professor in the geography department and the director of the Carnegie Global Organ Ethics Program and of the university's prison education program. And he's going to help introduce the rest of the people he brought with him.
Thanks very much. It's good to see you here. I'm grateful that you're here, grateful to Elise and the crew for the invitation to participate. And I think that what the panelists will share with you dovetails very closely with the theme and with the broader interests of this event and of some of the broader concerns that we share. So my name is Shaul Cohen. I direct the university's prison education program. The first time that I went into a prison in the United States was to visit a class that was being done by the University of Oregon inside the Oregon State Penitentiary maximum security facility. And I hadn't really intended to go there, but my work in other parts of the world had drawn attention to people here that I engage with, those who are incarcerated, formerly incarcerated, and they began to tell me that I needed to check in with a prison closer to home. I wasn't initially inclined, but students came and told me that this program was worth seeing. So I went into the prison. And I saw a group of U of O campus-based students engaging with their classmates who were incarcerated, and that was already impressive. While we were there, one of the students in the class residing in the penitentiary, Ben Hall, asked if he could share a poem with the group that he had written, having been inspired by the experience. And Steve Shankman, the instructor, said, sure. And Ben stood up and read a poem that continues to resonate inside of me. And I thought, if that's the kind of creativity that's going on in here, it's me that's missing out by not getting engaged with this opportunity. So I did get involved in the program, and I've been involved with it ever since. It's my great pleasure and my honor and a privilege to share with you 5 of the men that I worked with while they were incarcerated. They have been inspirational for the people coming in from the outside, inspirational for their community within the prison walls. They continue to do important things and contribute in myriad ways here beyond the prison. So if we can advance that slide, please. We wanted to share with you some of the dimensions of life of those incarcerated that aren't necessarily obvious from the outside. And I've chosen to begin with a couple of different things. We just, in the last 2 weeks, were recipients of a manifesto on how to design educational space within prisons. And I can evaluate that from a practitioner's perspective, but not from a design perspective, not from a planner or an architect's perspective. But one of the things that I noticed right away when I began to engage with this piece of work was that it was talking only about the classroom and not beyond there within the prison. So we engage within the classroom, but I've come to learn that there are all kinds of things that happen inside the prison cell and in the prison yard and in other spaces within those facilities. The piece you see at the bottom, Prison Education Program, was made by people inside the prison as a gift to us for our program. And the emblem that I'm wearing, the emblem that you see up there, was designed by people inside of the prisons here. And it's just tip of the iceberg in terms of their abilities, their creativity, and their vision. Next one, please. So we have a steering committee inside the Oregon State Penitentiary, and they push us to extend ourselves beyond our vision of what's possible in there. And one of the projects that we undertook was to write about that prison cell and what they're doing in it to have a life within the confines of the prison walls. So the group that authored this chapter was, I think, 8 undergraduates from the University of Oregon campus who were interns with the program going in on the regular, and about 10 guys residing in the prison who were members of that steering committee, and myself and our program coordinator at that time. The lived experience, of course, comes from the inside authors. We were simply the outsiders involved in thinking about it, talking about it, and that writing process. But this gives you a sense of that spirit and what we were trying to convey. And you're going to have an opportunity to hear that firsthand this evening. So the last slide that I'll share with you is the cover of that book that our chapter appears in, The Prison Cell Embodied in Everyday Spaces of Incarceration. Our chapter, Prison as Palimpsest, the Dialectics of the Cell in Everyday Life. And I can tell you our panelists this evening will introduce themselves. They're going to speak for 5 minutes each. After that, there'll be some Q&A, and they're sticking around for dinner if you want to extend the conversation. Whatever you get, again, from them this evening, tip of the iceberg. Prisons are harsh spaces. They're full of deprivation, punishment, loss, and they're full of people, many of whom are striving to express themselves and to be an individual in a system that strips them of their individuality. And they have talents of all kinds in there. So again, this is in a sense a little bit of an appetizer, and we encourage you to learn more about the program. The URL is there on that page, and to get involved and to recognize that the human spirit exists behind the prison walls and that it should be encouraged. All right, so I'm going to hand off the microphone first to Kyle. He'll send it down each 5 minutes, please.
All right. Thank you, Shaul, for not only this invitation, but for the years of work inside. I know that I was obviously personally impacted. My journey started in 1994. I was in high school and I was convicted of armed robbery and aggravated murder and sentenced to life without parole. So there I was, a teenager sitting in my cell, not really understanding what that would mean for me. And I'll tell you what, I didn't like it when the door clicked close. And I realized that at that point, I was no longer in control of my movement. And I don't know how many of you guys experience when you can't, maybe you're stuck in an elevator, maybe you're stuck in an office, that the doors are locked, and that little bit of panic. And I really didn't think about it as much until Shaul came to the work group and said, hey, we got this opportunity. We're going to talk about the cell. And I thought, why? I don't like my cell. That's where I'm locked in. That's when I can't get out. And the great thing about students and professors and the PEP program is it challenged us, and it challenged students, and it challenged everyone to think about things differently. And that kind of sums up education for me inside. How do we think differently? How do we change our thinking, and how do we change how we feel about whatever those topics are? And thinking about the prison cell, and this was a long project, weeks and weeks and weeks of conversation about what is the cell to me? And so for me, being a lifer, my cell was basically my home. A lot of people doing a lot of time sometimes would refer to their cells as, that's my house. I'm going back to the house. I'm going back home. Now, that might sound kind of funny because it's not really my home, but in reality, it was. And so I began to spend my time in my cell thinking about how can I change the environment that I live in for something better. And I started down this journey of writing proposals, of communicating with the administration, making suggestions. Can we do this? Can we do that? And my cell kind of became an office. And so now I thought about the cell differently because I was now in an office and there was work to do. And so the cell transformed, and it didn't become an area of confinement. It became an area to start thinking and to read and to write and to challenge myself, to study. And of course, taking classes, all the writing, because we did not have computers. So it's a lot of paper and a lot of pencils. And this project really made me think differently. Now, obviously, I'm here with you today. And so I was doing life without parole. And so I just thought, this is changing the way I think about my cell. Maybe I can help others feel better but this is the future. I'm going to be in this cell till the day I die. And that's kind of a stark reality for not just me, but for many guys that are doing life without parole. And so thinking differently about that one space in the prison for months really made me start appreciating all the other things that happened in there, whether it was shaving or artwork or playing my guitar. It began to change the way I thought about this place that I only had negative interactions with. And I feel like when we would have our group discussions, everybody, would start sharing those types of things. Like, I never really thought about it like that. And to me, that's what stood out, because anytime you say to yourself, oh, I never really thought about it like that, I call that progress because you're moving forward and thinking about, where am I at and how can that change? And so the work I was doing, the real work I was doing in that cell, really just helped propel my thinking to where I wasn't stuck in a cell. And so obviously, short into the story, Governor Brown granted me clemency in 2022, and after 28 years, I came home. So here I am.
I'll echo Kyle's appreciation for having the opportunity to be here tonight, and Shaul's tireless efforts over the number of years that I've had the good fortune to know him. Somewhat similar to Kyle, I, at an early age, middle school, I was 14 years old, and I made some horrible choices, and as a result of that, I was arrested and charged with aggravated murder, waived to adult court, prosecuted as an adult, and sentenced to life in prison for a minimum of 30 years before being eligible for parole. While I wasn't serving a true life without the parole sentence, I didn't know that I'd ever make it out of prison, especially in the early years, because there's just a lot of uncertainty in that environment. Juvenile systems are different than adult systems. They're all prison cells, if you will. In the juvenile systems, we call them rooms as opposed to cells in the adult system. So my first 18 months was spent in two different juvenile facilities, short-term facilities. I think I set the record at both locations for length of time being there. And it was very isolating. And there was this, like, what do we do with this kid who seems relatively well-mannered? I didn't cause problems. I didn't have outbursts. But what do we do with this young person charged with a very serious offense? And so it was very progressive in terms of how they allowed me more access to the rest of the facility and to other youth. And they only allowed me a small New Testament Bible in the room in the very early days. So that was kind of my initial engagement in lots and lots of reading. And that progressed over time. And part of what I find myself being very grateful for, among the many other things, is that I recognized pretty early on that if I didn't seek out opportunities to be responsible and to develop, that I wouldn't mature at the normal rate. Because when you're incarcerated, everything's decided for you. And in society, as you grow from a young person into a teenager and into a young adult and on, you have these sequential responsibilities that come your way. Jobs, insurance, driver's license, all that kind of stuff is very sequential, and it grows in responsibilities. And when you're told what you're going to wear and when you're going to leave the living space that you have and what you're going to eat and all those kinds of things, you don't have those responsibilities. So I ultimately spent nearly 18 years in 9 facilities spread out across the state of Oregon. The bulk of that time was at the Oregon State Penitentiary for about a dozen years. And my brother, who's 4.5 years older than I am and was my co-defendant, really got involved in education as soon as it became available back into the facilities, and really continued to advocate that I do the same. I had a lot of apprehension around being as young as I was, I got my high school diploma while incarcerated. I didn't think I had the academic capability to learn alongside students. But all of these kinds of different things, as I spent time in my room or cell, as time progressed for me, were times and opportunities to focus on what I did have control over, to think about the opportunities that were in front of me, to focus on different areas. My first Inside Out class really led the way to a lot of transformation for me, in being just feeling humanized by the students that I interacted with. And that put me back into myself, thinking about the different ways that I had a responsibility to be involved within my community there inside the prison, as well as to give back to the community outside of the prison, because I had caused harm. And as a result of that, I had a debt. About halfway through that first class, the professor said, the more you know, the more you owe. And that was just a huge piece for me in terms of shifting my perspective, getting me involved in things, and then using the time that I spent in my cell to be creative with thinking, with reading, with educating myself, in ways that were going to propel me forward, and that were ultimately, in my mind, going to make hopefully the best life that I reasonably could live while incarcerated, with the hopes of someday getting out, but no guarantee of that happening. And the knowledge that those same kinds of efforts would likely pay dividends and give me the best opportunity should I ever gain the opportunity to be in this free world with you all again. And so I'm extremely grateful for those opportunities, for the opportunities to get involved. And I've tried to continue to give back to the prison education program as I've gone through that, and will continue to do so. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Trevor. Wow. I'm Kevin Roper, and I want to extend thanks to all these guys. Been through actually classes with a couple of them. And Shaul definitely was effective in trying to... Huh? No brown nosing? Okay. Oh, sorry. I did not hear that. So if you didn't hear, my name's Kevin Roper. I, too, served time for aggravated murder. In 1987, I was sentenced to life with 30-year minimum and served 33 years and got out. Went in at 18 and got out at the age of 51, and I've been out approximately 5 years. The reason I sort of paint that picture is that I actually fell early enough they still had Pell Grants, access to college. And so I started college. And the term I finished my associate's degree, Clinton cut Pell Grants. And then it took only another 30 years to get the next 2 years of college under my belt to get a bachelor's, which I did graduate just before I actually walked out the door. At the week COVID closed everything down. That's interesting. But if I had to highlight anything, I think that's really relevant to our experiences is that prisons are a lived space. People actually live there. I mean, whether they're miserable or suffering is totally optional. So in that space, finding out how you choose to use your life, education is a magnifier of agency, for one thing. That's really what I learned. I think the most important, and I'd say it's also, you get to create where you want to live. You can't necessarily choose where you want to live, but you can create a place you want to live in. And so, much like these guys, I know they were very active in advocating inside the prison. For several years, I was part of the long-termers club and president for several years at a different institution than OSP. And at the end of the 4 years, I realized that I'd say the most effective thing I learned was I was happy at what I learned from running the club, but it was much more effective when education started coming in. I started realizing that my voice mattered. And when I say a live space is because, and so I'm sort of struggling here because there's a little bit of emotions for one thing. A lot of it is that I didn't realize how much I desired to change where I lived. And that still reflects out here in the bigger community. And so starting programs where we're doing art and we're teaching each other how to do art. I remember the one class I took in art back when they had Pell Grants. I actually argued with the art professor about art was and what creativity was. And we couldn't, and I'm surprised I got a C out of the class. It's the only C I've ever gotten. I'm surprised I even passed. But why I say that is because I went on to realize that, I mean, hell, spent 30 years of that time in the hobby shop, creating some becoming an incredibly talented artist, both in selling. Hell, I sell my woodworking patterns still today and get royalties from the time I was inside. And the pieces of art I create were all self-taught. And it's because I didn't believe that I had to stay small. Our voice mattered. And if anything, I'd say that it reflects out here in that every day I look at how the world goes and people complain that it can't change, and I believe it can. Mainly because I know it came to be the way it is, and it can change. It just has to have people that care and think and use their voice. And that's what the education was doing for me, because I TA'd for a couple of the teachers too. And the most important part that I found in these classes is the effect we have on each other when we use our voice and when we're talking to each other and we're causing each other to think and bring our lived experience into the conversation, because we all matter. And it's kind of hard to see that when you're in a place of deprivation where everything is telling you no, when in fact you know that you are alive and that your voice matters. And whatever the solution is I just like to share that encourage all you guys too. It's like, hey, you may not be incarcerated, but man, you guys matter. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me all right out there? Cool. I'm Sean McWeeny. I was incarcerated for 25 years for felony murder from the age of 18 to 43. I've been out about 5 years now. And thinking about kind of listening to everyone here and thinking about creativity in carceral settings, it got to me thinking about, I don't think creativity just happens when someone's put in a carceral setting. Like I could think about my experience, like even before I was incarcerated as a young person, I was in school, I was sent to in-school suspension or out of school suspension. I had a lot of that history. And I think I didn't find creativity there. I found resistance. I didn't want to embrace it. And same thing when I first went into prison, I didn't find creativity. I just found starkness and isolation. And I think the first place I kind of found creativity was in reading. So just kind of reading other people's lives, other people's stories, getting like a frame of reference outside of myself, kind of let my imagination go, let me be creative. And I think like that is the primary like means for creation that is unique to incarceration, is that that potential agency that can come through voice, that comes through really embracing kind of the solitude of incarceration. So like it makes me think of the journaling that I've done, or a lot of incarcerated people have done, the writing, the poetry that comes from people that are having this experience to where either they're processing maybe their experience, they're reflecting on their experience, they're reflecting on the world, and just like exploring their creative self that way. And I think after a time, and it was really maybe through my own processing and also through one of the Inside Out instructors, Professor Anita Chari, who teaches here at UO, she did a class, an Inside Out class called Autobiography as Political Agency. And she taught this class. I think I did the class like 5 times over the years. And one of the things she did, she didn't start doing this, but after a while, she would start each session with having all the students sitting in the circle, which we do in Inside Out. And she would have us start with a grounding exercise and just kind of like a meditation. And it was really it was really poignant, because in that letting go of the need to create, letting go of like, oh, I need to think of a thing, and just kind of like settling is a place for creation. And so that was a really big lesson that I got from Inside Out, from those classes. And I think just like exploring that in my own life, and like to what everyone else has expressed, is finding that agency to where my voice is my creation. I'm expressing myself, and when you experience like places like prison for extended periods of time, your agency is lost, it's stripped from you. Your humanity is in a lot of ways, and you do hear the no's, and you hear you're ostracized, you're deprived. And I'm not saying anything for that. I'm not here to like say I'm abolishing prisons or to excuse crime. I'm just saying that's the experience of it for the people that go through it. And I think creativity in prison in that way is unique, because it happens, especially if like everyone on this panel has done decades. So it's a process to where it might look different than creativity coming from normalized things. And also just like thinking about creativity in the space, like thinking about where a lot of people might find creativity in nature and things like that, where in prison it's concrete. So it's really, you're looking for that creativity inside, I think, a lot more than you are outside. And then you're exploring the kind of limited spaces inside that there are for creativity. Kevin mentioned the hobby shop, where like I saw him, he taught me to do like a bunch of woodwork and intarsia and like a bunch of stuff, to where I hadn't really explored my creative side prior, but like was able to do that. And like he mentioned, because I was incarcerated with this man for 20 plus years, he mentioned the art class, but he didn't mention that he started that art class. And the other guys mentioned that like creativity comes in program development and the agency and pushing forward. And Kevin started an art class there called Creative Connections, where he was working with the prison where we were at, had a unit with developmentally delayed prisoners. And so Kevin started an art class for them. And he would volunteer his time and got other people to volunteer his time and go down there to work with them, doing crafts, like all kinds of cool stuff. So like, that's the creativity, that's the agency that like I see amongst my peers. And yeah, I think if I were to talk about the uniqueness of creativity in prison, we kind of sum it up at that. So thank you.
Thank you. Don Severy here. I want to give a shout out, thank you to all of my co-speakers, and of course to our Professor Cohen, who saved me for last. Thank you, Professor. I also want to say that, can you imagine I'm sitting in the University of Oregon in this amazing place, and the technology is here, everything's here. Can you imagine Professor Cohen going to his colleagues and saying, hey, I've got this Inside Out program, and can you come along and teach a class? But we're going to the penitentiary in Salem, where they have chalk and a chalkboard. Can you imagine that? Well, the neat thing is that Professor Cohen brought Inside Out and the education program into my cell, into that space. Amazing. So I think that there's a huge factor in also working with the students that came into that program. You sit beside them, you listen to what they're doing on their college campus, their life experience and our life experience. And also, amazingly enough, these kids, the lightning strikes. And these kids, you light them up and they're on fire because they go out and accomplish amazing things in their life. And I think it's because they come in and they see the resilience of living a life with deprivation. And so I am just so impressed with the stories that Shaul brings back to us about these kids, I call them, that go out and just do anything. I mean, it's like the river going around the rocks in the stream. You might as well just get out of their way, because they're going to tunnel around you, they're going to crawl over you, or they'll just get around that obstacle because they're on fire. And they've done that. And they've had this experience, it's a lived experience, and they carry it with them the rest of their lives. Amazing stuff. So the couple of examples I want to share with you being inside the prison, they're kind of hokey, but also, since we're on a college campus, I thought we'd do an experiment. Come on, Shaul, experiment. Okay, so I'm tootling back to myself when I'm in incarceration inside the penitentiary. And I stop by my friend's house and I'm looking at his floor and I'm like, how did you do that? He's got like this tile idea. I thought, well, is there a construction project? Did you get tile, smuggled in? How did you do this? I realized that he had taken tape, overlaid tape in a checkerboard idea, and used floor wax and food coloring to create a design on his floor. Oh my God. I'm just thinking, how did you do that? So then another day, I'm talking to another friend of mine. I'm at his cell, and I'm looking in his cell, and I'm looking at this intricate little border that starts around the floor and then goes up on the ceiling and around his shelving. And I'm like, where did you get that tape at? I mean, where did you find that decorative tape? Got smuggled in somehow, and it did create this design. The guy shows me this little piece of cardboard that's like 5 inches long and has this intricate little pattern on it. And he used that as a stencil, and he colored it in with like magic marker. But he did it again and again and again and again and again and again. And I'm like, oh my God, who does that? Creative ability inside your cell. It's amazing. Like I said, the Inside Out program is just making our creative mind work and giving us those skills to just accomplish anything in our lives, no matter, like I said, this side of the wall or the other side of the wall. So those are a couple examples. Experiment time. Okay, so the experiment is this. All of you are going to participate. When you go home tonight after this event and you're in your house, I think the smallest room in your house is like the bathroom, maybe. So when you go into your bathroom tonight and you lock the door and then you do what you do in the bathroom and you're like, I don't know, take a shower, whatever you're doing, shaving, give it 15 minutes. And then think about, okay, I'm inside here. There's a whole world of distraction out there. You have kids, you have homework, you have car alarms, you have all this stuff. But the door's locked. You can't get out of that space. So think about another 15 minutes. What are you going to do in another 15 minutes? Well, you start I'm going to clean. I'm going to go through the medicine cabinet, throw out the old medications, start cleaning the shower, clean the mirror. Okay. Give it another half hour. And then what do you do? What do you do in that space for another half hour? Or think of it another day. Or think of it as a week or a month in that space. Doors locked, can't get out. Or even a year in that space. In my particular case, I was in that space for 34 years. Luckily, I had Inside Out. They came in to save me. Thank you so much.
I'm grateful for our program and proud of it. This was more of an advertisement for it than I had anticipated. But I've learned a lot in prisons, and one of the things they say there is that people are loyal to those that are loyal to you. And so I appreciate the support for the program from these guys. Just a brief comment, and then we will let you ask questions of them, and we're going to be sticking around for dinner, so if you are, the conversations can extend. We work with many very dedicated students within the prisons and dedicated students outside the prisons. On the one hand, these guys are cherry-picked and not typical. At the same time, they're common, and they're special because they made themselves into who they are today. And part of that process is the deprivation that comes from incarceration, as they've described. And part of that process is taking advantage of the opportunities that exist or that you create to grow in a place where growth is not encouraged. And we're aware always of where we are when we're inside the prison walls. We have a growing body of students who are formerly inside and now out here in the world with us, they continue to teach us that though the prison environment constrains, it doesn't entirely define. And we hope that that experience of their lives can be inspirational to you. You're here on the outside, but you're setting out to shape the world, change the world, to have an impact. And you can do that in all kinds of ways that may not be evident, may not be easy. But if you have the vision and you commit yourself to them, there's all kinds of things that you can accomplish that you didn't anticipate. That's true for each of these guys. I'm super grateful to them and to all the rest on the inside. And please, we've got a little while. Your questions for them are welcome. So how are the accommodations and architectural different for people who are convicted of white-collar crimes and rich people, CEOs, and from other prisons? So a question about different prison conditions for people who have committed different offenses. And maybe you're thinking about the country club notion that some federal facilities or some politicians get sent off to. There are all kinds of different prisons in Oregon, and these guys have been in a bunch of them, so we don't even need to go anywhere else, but speak please to the different types of accommodations, if you will, that exist here for people.
So I don't have any direct experience with the federal system, which is, I would say, the only likely semi-reflection of what's being referenced. My dad did a couple years in a federal prison camp for what was considered a white-collar crime, nonviolent, and there were very big differences from what he shared with me, like a movie theater type environment that you go to, or that he went to, and a more similar store than what we experienced on the state system. That being said, the federal system can put you anywhere they want you. So we were here in Oregon. We asked for him to be close. They moved him to Duluth, Minnesota, and he was there for 2 years, and we didn't have the real ability to visit during that time. And so that's one of the less desirable aspects, I would say, of the federal system. And there's a good number of prisons here in Oregon that are very remote from where the majority of people are incarcerated as well, but at least it's in state. Outside of that, I mean, they're focused on security, I would say, across the board. As Don was talking about some of the different cells that he saw, it reminded me in county jail, it was really common to have toilet seats made out of playing cards, because you neither in prison nor in the county facilities did you have a toilet seat, and it's nice to have that covered. And so they would make homemade playing card toilet seats, just kind of that, to get back to that creative theme. So I don't know if that answers your question. I don't know if any of us have direct experience with any kind of cush systems.
I would say one of the only differences is that some cells, while they're all relatively the same size for the most part, some cells have more of a solid door with maybe a couple little windows or maybe one narrow window. And then other cells, like at the state penitentiary, a lot of them are kind of that traditional cell that you see on TV with the old school prison bars. And so obviously one gives you a little bit more privacy. The cell bars being open, and if you can imagine, these are 40 cells long, 5 tiers tall, and there's 2-sided. So with no solid doors, you can hear every conversation, every snore, every fight, every yell, every radio. So there's a lot of disruption because you're just inundated with all this extra noise. So that would be the biggest difference for me as far as construction.
I was going to say scary, actually, because I'm always fearful of the trauma it may inflict, the emotions it may bring up, that because I didn't enjoy it myself, so I don't like inflicting it on others, if that makes any sense. So for me, the first part isn't so much about just like, oh, they'll get a feel of it. It's like, no, I don't want to cause harm, and I have been harmed by the experience. So for myself, I'd say it's trepidation at first. There is a little bit of connection. I've had some feedback about some of my writing where they're just like, wow, that was a lot. So that helps. Or did that help? Okay, thank you.
No. 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 No, it's a good question. It's a fine question. No, it's an interesting question because as you referenced, like we spent a lot of time there, and it is a lot of kind of how we navigate the world is through that lens of that experience. So you miss people in there, and some people I think that deal with it to where they just don't want to think about it or talk about it, or even associate with people that had the same experience. They just kind of want to put it behind them. And a lot of my peers are like that. And then there's other people that kind of go further down the rabbit hole and like kind of have that mentality, the only way out is through, and like want to become part of the solution, and are find meaning in their own lives, by being advocates or by having like using their voice. But so with that, like that, there are silver linings that come from the experience of long-term incarceration. But to say I miss it, or yeah. Yeah, I mean, definitely not there. Like I was thinking about, like, I was I was with my girlfriend a couple weeks ago. It's like 3 weeks ago, and we're in Astoria, and we went to the jail there where they filmed the Goonies. We were just like, looking for stuff to do. And so I walk in, they have on display an old jail cell that's open. And so, but it's a literal jail cell. It was used as a jail cell at one point. So it's not a film jail cell. So I walked in it, and this is the first time I had walked in a cell in 5 years. And it felt like something. It felt oppressive. I felt the weight of it. I felt enclosed. And to Don's point, Don's exercise is good, because that was the space we lived in. Was 11 by 7, was the size of a bathroom. And it was a bathroom. There's a bathroom in there. And then you got your bunk bed, and you're with another man. It's like stacked in this place. So no, don't miss it.
Well, I think you have a community here, like where you're on campus, so you have resources and advocates and all sorts of things that you do socially interacting. We had that while we were incarcerated in a tighter circle, because and you're also trapped by the same type of population that you'll see day after day after day, where you have on the outside, you have more resources to go different directions. And so I think to answer your question is that you had also the ability to reach down inside yourself while you're incarcerated to find out amazing things about what you have, creativity, emotionally, all sorts of stuff while you're incarcerated. On the outside, I think that you're distracted by your phone and by this and by that and by homework and by whatever you're doing in your life. So you might have less time to just reach down inside yourself.
Yeah, I'll just second that real quick. There's definitely more distractions out here. But I think all of us, I know the four of us, Don, I don't know to what extent, we all do social advocacy work. So we're kind of doing the same work we were doing in prison in a lot of ways, to where we're out there making it, trying to affect change.
I'll say one thing real quick on that. I do miss the camaraderie. I think it was brought up earlier. Just being stuck in that place. Obviously, we were stuck with all these other people that were stuck. And you kind of build these circles, like your close friends, and then, other friends and people you work with and people you might go to the yard, play sports with. And the world out here is not like that. I have not found a group of dudes that really want to hang out and play cribbage for 4 hours. And I've asked. But man, it was fun playing crib for 4 hours sometimes. You just relax, you're in the zone, cracking jokes. And so I acknowledge that. And I tell people, like, being stuck together, it just changes the way you think about people, and I suppose on some levels it could go negative, and on some levels it goes positive. And for me, it was like, that was my network. Those were my people. They're still my people because they're still stuck there. And we've gotten a few out, which is great. But I still feel like the bulk of the men that I know in my life are still incarcerated.
So I certainly benefited from a lot of family support to help make that transition successful. The other thing that I would say is my perspective coming out. I was almost 32 years old when I stepped out of prison, and I had been in since I was 14. And so I recognized that I was going into I was a big fish in a little pond, stepping into the ocean as the smallest fish ever known. And so, recognizing that I needed to start at the bottom and work my way up was very helpful. And in ways, I think it was helpful that I hadn't ever been an adult in society, because for me, hasn't and continues to not really be like me trying to catch up for something that I missed. I'm not trying to get back to a mortgage or back to a family or back to things that I had lost because I had never gotten to that place. And so for me, it's like all new. It's a challenge for sure. But I'm going to come out here. I'm going to live what I hope to be a redeeming life. I'm going to recognize that I'm not entitled to the privileges and freedoms that I have, but I've earned them, and I will continue to earn them. And that for me is the motivation to be an example for other people to look to know that success is possible after these kinds of experiences, and to just be a positive in the world, as in contrast to the choices that I made when I went to prison.
Good question. In that, so something I didn't touch on is I spent many years also doing 3D drafting and mapping at a program that the state had. So I share that because I can actually visualize things really well. And I don't think the architecture matters so much as in the underlying philosophy, as in it's a system designed on inflicting pain and punishment, versus the mindset of the true change that we see in prison is when, and I saw it with different administrators, when they come through and their intention is they want to create growth or they want to create healing. And it's hard to do in a society that believes punishment is the only way to fix wrong. Yeah, you hurt someone else. And I think that's the big thing, is to ask what you're designing and why. And that then, and from that space, because then you can create an environment that feels like you're enabling the thought that there's something better, there can be growth.
I ride Harley Davidson motorcycles.
And he talked me into it too, so there's
too.
that. And Kevin rode here on his, so I didn't say what I do. So I work on policy reform, so I live in Salem. I spend most of my days at the Oregon legislature advocating for policy changes. So the big change for me was inside. I was writing, security manager, superintendent, asking for things, get a denial, answer the denial, come up with a different practice, and try and get something accomplished. Relatively short turnaround time. One thing I've realized about Oregon's legislature is that, well, it takes a long time. There ain't no such thing as a 30-day answer. You might take a couple years to work on stuff or longer. And so, but it's those skills of, I wouldn't say negotiation, but skills on realizing that just because you ask for something, even if it makes 1,000% sense, you be prepared. It's going to get denied, and you got to come back, and you got to be creative, and you can't give up. And I think all of us in each of our own way, we had this tenacity. We were not going to give up on ourselves. We weren't going to give up on the people around us. And so to me, I've really carried that these past few years, saying, I could deal with it in prison where I had very little agency. And now that I'm out, we just keep pushing.
So there's more for these guys to answer to each of these really good questions. And I'm eager for the conversation to extend. I wish I had brought a photograph of something that we did one morning in the prison. I consider myself to have zero artistic talent. One of the crew in there was making roses out of toilet paper that were exquisite. And we were admiring his work and praising him. And he told us that we could do that too, and we didn't believe him. So the next time he came equipped, and toilet paper is a commodity inside of a prison. And in the span of about 25 minutes following his lead, each of us had made a long-stemmed, beautiful white toilet paper rose. And I wouldn't have thought it possible, but there it was. And we have a bouquet of those roses in our office here on campus that came from that occasion. There's also a whole lot of artwork in our office. We're not doing an art exhibit this year from the program. We'll hope to be back next year. But do come by and see some of what people inside have crafted. It is truly remarkable. And I want to say just that one of the things we're constantly learning together from one another. For our program, it's different than some education inside prison programs which have a couple initials and a degree as the goal. That's not really our primary goal at the University of Oregon. Our goal is to give as many people a start that they can then pursue. And we're privileged to be able to do that. It does sometimes, though, get to a point of conclusion and accomplishment. So before we head upstairs for dinner, I hope that you will join me in congratulating one of our panelists, Kyle here, who began his studies inside and last term completed his bachelor's degree from the University of Oregon. Hasn't had a chance to have that celebrated. So So again, we look forward to continuing the conversation with you over dinner. Let me point out that we have people from the other side of the program here. So we've got Hannah and Jeevan and Beatrice, all who have been learning assistants, interns with the program inside. We've got Evelyn, who took a course in the prison, Asia and Tara, who are taking courses in there right now. So please do engage, but you can talk with the students who've been part of the program from the other side of the wall as well. Again, thank you so much for being here. Thanks for the invitation. You've been a wonderful audience, and we hope to keep talking with you. Thank you.